to get Megan out here from Strengthen ND. Grant writing is probably our most frequently requested topic at any of the continuing education events that we do. So I'm glad we could get an expert here finally to talk to you. So without further ado, here we go for our grant writing bootcamp.
All right, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Some of you have seen me before. I am a little bit of a walker and a talker, and sometimes I go off on tangents with stories, so I apologize. I'll try to reel it in because I know we only have 50 minutes together, but there's so much good information, and grant writing and grant seeking can be so fun, and it really is an amazing way to drive investment into your programs. So I'd like to start off this session like I do a lot of sessions with kind of explaining the reason for the picture on the slide. So the picture that is up there is actually the farm that I grew up on. So I grew up in a very rural area, just outside of a little town called Warwick. Went to school in Cheyenne and then went all the way over to Minnewacan and had a great education there and had a great librarian in Cheyenne by the name of Marilyn Kruger. I don't know if any of you know her, but she was pretty great. So the reason that I put this slide or this photo on this slide is to reinforce that I know a lot of you are very small organizations, very small libraries, very small schools, very short staff. So everything we're going to talk about today is practical and applicable that you can start to inject into the way that you go about your grant seeking and grant writing today. You can start utilizing these tools and the things that we talk about today. So on the next slide, just a little bit of a story of Strengthen ND. So Strengthen ND was really born out of that desire to support some of our smaller communities, our most rural communities. So we do that by supporting and accelerating community development. And our approach for community development is to first build the capacity of nonprofit professionals and community leaders within North Dakota. We really think that we've got amazing people here who can really elevate our state, 2, advance regional issues, and 3, support community solutions. So we won't talk too much about that. And the next slide is the unfortunate obligatory awesomeness slide that everybody has to put up, just so you know that we know what we're talking about. Grant writing is one of our kind of bread and butter projects or services that we offer. I am a huge grant writing nerd. I started out with the North Dakota Center for Persons with Disabilities at Minot State University. So that's basically alphabet soup for an organization that wrote federal grant after federal grant after federal grant. So it really became ingrained in me, kind of a specific process. So before we get into the real meat of the program today, I realized on the way down here that I had neglected to put in our 10 commandments of grant writing into our slide deck. So I quick put that in there when I came in this morning, so it won't be on your slides, but it's pretty easy stuff to jot down. So it's important whenever you are going after specific grants or whenever you hired somebody or assigned somebody to go after grants that you keep these 10 things in mind. Number 1, thou shalt not use jargon. So I've had experience both working at a foundation and serving on boards where we review grant applications. I was a program officer for about 5 years, and I can tell you sometimes grant applications come in and I'm sure what you've written is really, really great, but I can't understand a darn thing because I can't speak your language, right? So thou shalt not use jargon. 2, thou shalt not overuse acronyms, right? We tend to get in that, especially in the education field where we're trying to abbreviate so much so that we can save enough space, or because maybe we just kind of know and understand what SPED is, what MDEC is, what NDSL is, but your reviewer probably doesn't have a clue. So thou shalt not overuse acronyms. Even STEM. There are a lot of people that don't understand, or it's not common knowledge yet, what STEM is, even though we've all talked about it for years. Number 3, thou shalt not forget your readers. Most people, and this goes for a lot of things, and I'm sure you all know this, most people read at a 6th grade level, read and comprehend at a 6th grade level. So when we're writing our grant applications, sometimes we want to use very floofy or trendy words, but in reality, we have to remember who our audience is and who's reading it, because they might look at that and say, well, that's a bunch of fluff or garbage, or might not understand it. So try to write at a 6th grade level. Number 4, thou shalt not write for a deadline that is less than 3 weeks away. Grant writing, in order to be successful at it, it takes time to think through your project from beginning all the way to end. It takes time to generate letters of support. It takes time to research data. It takes time to send your grant application off for a cold reader to review it so they can catch these little mistakes that you might have. I was a part of a grant writing team that was writing a grant for a school, and somehow everything got auto-corrected or find and replace, where public got changed to pubic, and we didn't know. So grant writing really takes time. Number 5, thou shalt not underestimate the value of a cold reader. See previous example. But that cold reader should be somebody from outside of your organization or outside of your department or area that you're working in, and ask them to read through it and say, is what I'm saying really making sense? Does this make sense? Can the average person who walks up off the street understand it? Do I have any of those silly grammar mistakes or spelling mistakes? So that's a great investment or a great partnership to have with someone in your office or within your school. Number 6, read and remember the grant guidelines and keep them holy. We do grant management for a particular grant where the maximum that you can request at any time is $50,000. And yet, we still get people who ask for $60,000 or $65,000 or $75,000. You have to just always read those grant guidelines. Specifically too, when we're looking at federal grants, if you write federal grants, you know that you can't buy things like food. So if you have a meeting with youth in your community, you can't buy them donuts, right? So making sure that you don't have that within your grant application is important. And even some of the additional uploads that they need, there are some organizations where if you don't have all of the right documentation, they just kick it out right away and don't even read it. So make sure that you take that time to read all of those guidelines, because you might not even qualify. We've had organizations that have said, hey, can you help us write this? And I say, absolutely, but you don't qualify. So always make sure that you read and review the guidelines. 7, thou shalt not reinvent the wheel. If there's a replicable model that exists somewhere else in the country or in the state, consider utilizing that in your grant application to reinforce your approach. You don't have to be new and innovative all the time. Sometimes using something that's proven can be really helpful. 8, thou shalt not write for more grant dollars than are available, or more grant dollars than you need, or less grant dollars than you need. So sometimes we try to play this game with program officers where we say, okay, well, we need 2,500, but maybe if we ask for 5,000, then they'll actually give us 2,500. Or someone will say, well, how much money will they give me, when they're asking if they should write for a grant pool. And the question always has to be, how much money do you need? And you have to keep that in mind whether you're writing for grant pool A, grant pool B, or grant pool C. It's how much money do you need to make that project effective or to make it go. And then we can try to piecemeal that grant seeking strategy out amongst multiple funders. But that way you have a comprehensive picture of how much funding you actually need. Number 9, research and respect your potential funders. So with every grant pool or every grant maker, there are these little nuances that people might not know. So Otto Bremer Trust is a great example. They provide a lot of funding in North Dakota, and they do a lot of operational funding and even support for children and therapy services. But they will not fund equine therapy. They don't have it on their website. But if you talk to a program officer ahead of time, they'll say, you know what, we've just not had good experience with equine therapy, we won't do it. Or they won't fund children's museums. Or Hess won't fund capital build-outs for walls and a floor, but they'll fund the stuff inside your new capital campaign. So always just connecting with those program officers ahead of time or those corporate sponsors ahead of time to say, okay, what is it that you specifically like to fund? And then 10, thou shalt not submit to a local or regional foundation without talking to the program officer or representative first. This gives them a good heads up that your application is coming. They know to look for it, and they have to be the advocate for you. So the more that you can get them on board before you submit your grant application, the better off in the long term you're going to be. All right, so now that we get right into the boot camp, all of those 10 commitments are really important, and then the boot camp, what we're going to do is talk about 5 mini sessions to create that winning proposal. And those 5 mini sessions are documenting why your organization is the right fit. Why they should give the funds available to you. Understanding who your needs and target, what your needs and target demographic are. Talking through goals, objectives, and outcomes. Talking through a budget and budget narrative, and then linking that forward through with project design. So as we jump in the why you piece, documenting your organization and your capacity. What we're talking about really when we say why you is what are those 3 things, sometimes tangible or intangible, what are those 3 things that your organization has that other organizations don't have? So what are your strengths, what's your capacity, and what are your past achievements? So strengths. One big strength that you might have is either that you are a standalone 501c3, or you're a part of your school's 501c3 designation status, or maybe that you have your own foundation. So understanding your nonprofit status and what type of flexibility that status has for you. 2, looking at the vision of your library. So where has your library come from in the past? And where do you see it going in the future? Do you see moving more into teen services? Do you see moving more into, I know Brandy Jude's coming in to do human trafficking awareness training. So how, like, do you see your library becoming more of a community hub than just a quote unquote traditional library? Who do you have as a part of your board members or officers or others connected within your organization? It's really important that in fundraising, we know that people give to people. And also with grant writing or grant makers, people give to people as well. Specifically those local funders that you might be looking at. People always give to people. So highlighting who's on your board and what specific skill that they bring to it. Highlighting who specifically is your kind of leadership transition team. Looking at your partners and networks. Who is it that you work with? Are you an organization that is very connected within the community, where you work not only with the library, you work not only with the school, but maybe you work with the police department, or maybe you work with the local grocery store to provide snacks for kids who might not have those, you know? So what are your partnerships and networks? And what is unique to you? Every organization has a selling point or some type of story that is theirs and only theirs, and we have to be sure to document that story and highlight that story in these types of opportunities. Capacity. What's your staffing look like? What's your staff capacity look like? Are you requesting a large grant, a $200,000 grant, and you only have 1 staff member? Or maybe you have 5 staff members, right? So what's your staffing look like? What's your staffing structure look like? And what types of efficiencies are generated because of that staffing structure? And then also looking at financial oversight and management, specifically if you are a smaller organization, what types of internal controls do you have where a grant maker would feel comfortable giving you funds and trusting that you would be a good steward of those funds? So in grant, sometimes with grant makers, they might be a little wary of giving to an organization that maybe hasn't had a strong grant making or grant history before. Either they just haven't written for grants in the past or they've been small. So this is the way that we can really beef up that we have those necessary internal controls, because grant funds mismanagement happens all the time, and foundations really now are trying to protect themselves from that. And then capacity as well. Who are your contractors or consultants that you work with that might add to whatever area that you specifically are requesting that grant fund for? And then achievements. I think we don't play enough into the history of our organization. We kind of look at our history and say, well, yeah, other communities have done this, or there's nothing super special about the way that we were founded, but there's always a story there. There's always a human story there about why an organization was created, why a library was founded, and all of that good work that has happened from then until now. So really documenting the impact that you've had on the community. Talking about other grants received, past activities, maybe other awards received. And also taking the awards received and highlighting staff members that have received awards. Because every person that interacts within your library, your board of directors, or your staff, they're all a part of your brand. So we have to talk about them within our applications to show our capacity. And it's important that we show versus tell. So it's one thing to say that Strengthen ND is the greatest organization of all time, but how can I actually show you that that's the truth? What data do I have to back that up? So here's an example that we have utilized in the past. We say an example of just telling would be, Strengthen ND is the most effective organization for developing proposals in Western North Dakota. So what? Who knows that? According to who? According to whom? Or actually showing it. Strengthen ND's proposal development efforts have generated over $5 million in fundable projects in 18 months. So there's a big difference in the impact when you just say that you're a great organization versus showing that you're a great organization and backing that up with data. So I passed out on your tables an example of a letter that we wrote. This was our one-page application for a particular opportunity that we were invited to be a part of. And the reason that I bring this letter is that in North Dakota, we are really bad about tooting our own horn. And we have to get better at that because we have great organizations making a wonderful impact in our community and not enough people know about it. So one thing that we looked at when we said that we were going to be going after this opportunity to be the North Dakota Change Network partner, side plug, North Dakota Change Network is now accepting applications as of yesterday. So it's all about systems change. So if anybody's interested in that, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. It's an awesome opportunity. But to be the North Dakota partner for Change Network, we had to look at the other competition or the other people that we knew were going to be going after this opportunity and think about how we were different from them. What set us apart from them? And that was our organizational capacity, that was our statewide connectivity, and that was our understanding of North Dakota nuance. That's what we leaned into and that's what we highlighted and really nothing else. So when you're going up for funding with other libraries or with other people in your community, you have to think about what's our competitive advantage? What is it that we do better than anybody else in our community? And not be afraid to really talk about it and show that to your funder. Because grant makers want to invest in great organizations who can show that they're doing that good work. All right, so I've got a little piece of, or a worksheet on your table. I want you just to pause, and we're gonna pause for probably less than a minute because I already see that I'm behind on my time. But just scratch down under the organizational capacity piece. What are just a couple of things that you can highlight? Who can you highlight? What stories can you highlight? What skill sets can you highlight in your next grant application? And the goal is at the end of our session today, you'll have some really great pieces that you can pull from that worksheet and incorporate into your next grant application. So we'll pause for just a couple seconds to give you time to jot that down. So really don't underestimate the power of leaning into your organization and its history, its success, and your capacity, not only as an organization, but as individual staff. Okay. So we talked about why you, and now we can move into needs and target demographic. So who are you hoping to impact and something that you should invest in? So who are you hoping to impact and why? We genuinely feel that this is the most important part of your proposal. And it's because it lays the foundation for everything else that's to come, including your project design and your budget and what your outcomes are going to be. So really we have to get this right, because what we put in this needs, so sometimes funders will call it identify need of your project, or they'll say tell us about your community, but really what they're saying is set the stage for why it is that you need these funds. So what we want to do in the needs and target demographic piece is to identify the need or issues related to the problem to be addressed. And here's where we need to be specific and we need to be thoughtful. So at the bottom, I have something that says, we should spend so much more time thinking about the need in our community, the state of our community, the people in our community. We should spend three times much more time on that piece rather than thinking about our solution or what it is that we actually want to do. And sometimes we flip that, right? We say, okay, this is a big need in our community, we think about it, and then we say, okay, now let's take 4 times as much time to create this new program or to think through how we could do this. When really, I would challenge you to flip that ratio. Think and really drill down to what is it that you're seeing in your community and why are you seeing that? So always think about the who and the why. So for example, a project that we worked on in the past and we're still kind of framing it out with a couple other partners, it was a project to address the impending aging boom of our community, of our state. So we all know that as the boomer generation ages, we as a state are going to see a huge strain on our aging services. So when we're looking at the state right now and some of the indicators that we were seeing that prompted us to think about, okay, maybe we should try to do something, some type of intervention, is that we saw that the state can't afford the cost of seniors in nursing homes right now, much less when that population grows by about, I think it's like 59% in the next 10 years. There are record numbers of seniors entering nursing homes, and we're also seeing an out-migration of seniors. So those are the indicators, those are the things that we saw in the community, and spending a little bit more time and really drilling down to, okay, why is it that we're seeing those indicators? We thought, well, the root cause is that seniors aren't given the tools that they need to age in place, to stay in their home as long as they can. Either it's food access, service access, proximity to healthcare. There's not enough support for seniors to age in place. So really thinking not just about those indicators, but spending a lot more time to drill down to what that root problem is. And then once we really drilled down to what that root problem is, then we talked about, okay, well, what is it that we can do? How can we support aging in place? So it's just an example just to kind of talk through that process. So when we're talking about our needs and target demographic, we want to be, again, specific and strategic with our data. North Dakota Compass is a great website that has a ton of applicable data all in one spot. And it's important to note that sometimes the data you need doesn't exist. So if we're being thoughtful, if we're following the 10 commandments of grant writing and we don't start writing for a grant that's less than 3 weeks out, we then can take the time to generate our own data. We can do our own polling, our own surveying. And we had to do that with a project that I was involved in called Apple. Sorry, the red light came on. Okay, we're back online. So we had to do this with a project that we were involved in called Apple. It was, we were hooked on acronyms back at NDCPD. Apple stood for Advancing Paraprofessional Leadership in Education for paraeducators across the state. We wanted to write for this grant opportunity around paraeducation, and we kept searching for data around it, and we couldn't find anything. But we were about a month out, so we just did a quick survey of schools to see, okay, is what we're hearing anecdotally, is that actually happening? And we used that quick data in the application, and it really strengthened our needs statement because we weren't just telling the grant maker or telling the federal government that, you know, this is a need we're seeing. We could back that up with that data. So again, you can't just tell somebody that this is a need. You have to be able to show them with data. Another trap that you can fall in sometimes with the needs and target demographic is not allowing enough space for opportunity. A big mistake that we did one time was we pulled all of this data to show that things in this specific part of the state were terrible. We really need help, we really need intervention. And we submitted it to a funder, and they said, why would we fund this? It sounds like there's no hope, right? There's no opportunity. And we thought, oh, that was a punch in the gut. So even though there might be some of those indicators drilling down to the root cause of what's going on in your community, some of those more severe needs, we have to be able to open that door for the donor or open that door for the grant maker to say, but here's an opportunity for us to move forward. We talk about utilizing the data and trying to connect the dots for the donors or for the grant makers. And it's important, again, to reinforce that the needs piece of your application is one of the most, if not the most important pieces. So we just wrote a grant with a few regional education associations called North Dakota Full Service Community Schools. And it was an opportunity to support pipeline services into schools. So pipeline services around behavioral health, around physical health, around juvenile justice or restorative justice. And what we did with the needs section, because we knew that that was a part of the grant or what the outcomes of the grant would be, we pulled then all of the data around behavioral health, around physical health, around restorative justice, and included that in our needs. So that way when we said, okay, here's what we're seeing in our communities, and here's how this can help. So we were able to connect the dot from actual boots on ground work to what the project would do. Again, don't do this. don't make your grant application sound like the world is ending in rural North Dakota. Make sure to highlight those opportunities, because that was a very embarrassing mistake for us. And then kind of a bonus piece of this, for those of you who are working in small and rural communities, illustrate North Dakota's rurality. Sometimes when people are reviewing grant applications and they might be living in Bismarck, or they might be living in Washington, D.C., or they might be living in the Twin Cities, they don't understand how truly rural we are out here. So we have to reinforce that, because rural Washington or rural Virginia looks very different than rural North Dakota. So a way that we did that, and this is for that Apple proposal, was the very first line of our grant application said, consider for a moment a single institution with 2 staff entrusted to prepare paraprofessionals working with K-12 students in one of the most rural states in the nation, a state the geographical equivalent of the country of Syria. So we knew that our reviewers are going to be in Washington. They probably know more about other countries than they do maybe North Dakota. So we wanted to be able to tie in. If you look at the country of Syria, if you look at that geographic size, that's what we have in North Dakota. And we only have 2 staff to run this particular program. Okay, so I'm going to pause for just a second. I want you to, on that worksheet, write down a couple of things that you can highlight for your need or your target demographic. All right, next piece of the boot camp or of the 5 mini sessions. So we talked about why you. Why is your organization grant ready? Why are you the best organization to accept these funds? We've talked about our community. What needs are we seeing within our community, and how can we document those needs? Now it's time to start talking about what our goals, objectives, and outcomes will be for the grant that we are writing or for our project. So this is really where we talk about the how. So how are we going to make the community better? How are we going to impact teen girls? How are we going to engage teen boys in STEM? Whatever that project might be. It's very important to reinforce that the needs and your target demographic drives your approach. It drives your goals, your objectives, and your activities. Because we have to take into account each community's own culture, each community's own resources, and the culture of the students that we are working with. A one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work in North Dakota. So your need and your target demographic drives your goals, objectives, and activities. So you should be able to draw a direct link from each of those sections as you're working down your grant. And then your goals, objectives, and your outcomes drive your budget in no other way, okay? So goals, you need to have a clear ultimate aim for what it is that you're requesting funds for. Really, again, it should be the flip side of your need or your problem statement, and we want to avoid generalities. So for example, we're going to end hunger in Ward County. Is that feasible? Does it have any specific measurables with it? Instead, this is that aging project that I talked about with identifying the root cause of the needs. So our goal with that project was, through the Aging in Place project, Strengthen ND and Community of Care will facilitate the development of a community response to aging in rural North Dakota to support seniors to age in place with dignity and independence in 4 communities over 3 years. So you see that we've got measurables, we've got our partners, and we have, it's time bound of when we want to do it. With your grant writing, or with your grant that you are writing, you can have one goal and several objectives. You can have multiple goals and several objectives. My preference, for the most part, even with large grants, is to have one overarching large goal. And then for me, it's easier to break it down in my head with objective 1, the how I'm going to accomplish that goal, and then break that down even further into activities. So for me, that's what works, is to think about it in one large chunk, and then how I can break that down rather than having several different goals. But again, it's personal preference. If your goal is your overarching aim, the objectives should be the specific framework of what will be accomplished. So this is really the meat of your program design, or the meat of your work plan. This is your how. So we all know we want it to be SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. Again, I was talking about having your big goal and then breaking it down into objectives. I take it a step further and I break it down into activities, because putting in that work on the front end for the grant and being able to, again, allow your goals, objectives, and outcomes and activities to drive that budget, then you can do a budget by activity, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this makes sure that you don't miss anything when you're budgeting. It makes sure that you don't miss anything when you're looking at time allocation. Again, it helps develop staff measurables. And every then grant project that you have has a work plan that's almost a checklist. So if you were to be hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow, somebody would be able to take up that grant work plan and make sure that that grant is brought to fruition. And work plans are a whole nother 1 or 2 hour session, so I won't go into detail with it, but I'm happy to provide our sample worksheet for anybody who wants to delve deeper into it. And then our outcomes. So we've got our goals, we've got our objectives, and our outcomes are what specifically will be accomplished. This can help the funder understand what their return on investment is going to be within the grant period. It supports the creation of logic models. I have a handout that I utilize often to help break down logic models for folks. I've got that up here and it's available if you would like to take a piece at or to take a look at it. It's not that often that you'll run into logic models. However, they are becoming more common. So if you're not comfortable with logic models now, it's something to work on in the future, because now foundations like Xcel Energy Foundation, who is typically a small grantor, about $2,500, maybe $5,000, they're requiring logic models for all of their grant applicants. Again, your outcomes support budget creation, documentation of impact, and really make sure that you keep that mission drift really in check. So we're going to take a brief pause, and I want you to look at that worksheet and jot down any thoughts you have on developing those goals, objectives, and activities. And again, up here, you can come and grab it at the end. I've got a logic model handout that's really, really helpful. But program evaluation is a whole 18-month-long course in and of itself. All right, moving all along so we can stay on time. So we've talked about why your organization is the best fit for the grant funding, talking about the needs that you're seeing within your community, who you're specifically going to target, and then we've talked about our actual how. So what is it that we're going to do and how are we going to do it? So now we have to talk about how we're going to make sure that we have enough resources to be able to take on that work. So talking budget and budget narrative. Sometimes, and this goes beyond just grant writing, this goes to just budgeting in general within our organizations. We all tend to want to be super frugal, but we have to make sure that we align the resources that we have within our budget accurately and responsibly. So if one of our big organizational goals is to really take on fundraising and raise a lot of funds this year, but we allow them very, very little money to actually do that, and that's money in terms of printing costs, in terms of event costs, in terms of staff time, then we're really just setting people up for failure. So we have to ensure that we are aligning the resources that we're requesting accurately and responsibly. So again, your goals, objectives, and your outcomes have to drive your budget. There's no other way around that. And I'm going to predicate this even by saying, well, Megan, we have a $100,000 ask, or we have a $100,000 project, but this is only a $5,000 grant request or $25,000 grant request. It still doesn't matter because you have to have your goals and objectives and outcomes driving that big target budget. It's the same. It's the same approach whether you're requesting a full amount or whether you're requesting a piece of it. You still have to be able to portray that information of how you got from here to here. So budget can make or break your proposal. It's got to be consistent with your proposed work. So if you are launching a new program and you only allow about 10% FTE to go to that new program, and it's a pretty ambitious program, now we have a lot of board members and grant makers who are pretty savvy, and they'll be able to see right through that. Details are appreciated. Never, ever, ever have a line for miscellaneous. This happens quite often. There never should be any miscellaneous costs. Certainly office supplies, certainly software upgrades or things like that, but never just miscellaneous. And your in-kind contributions should be both in your income and the expense part of your budget. So for example, if you do a robotics program at your library and you have people in the community that donate 10 hours every week and you don't include that within your grant proposal or the total budget for that program, then your funder isn't able to see the true cost of your program. They're only seeing those hard costs, and they have to be able to see that true cost, especially when in-kind volunteer hours can be valued according to independent sector at about $25.24 an hour. It might be $24.25 an hour, but it's right around $25.25. So that can have a huge increase when you're looking at a funder, specifically like an Otto Bremer Trust or a Bush Foundation, who's going to say, okay, well, what's the true cost of this program? And you say, well, it's just a couple of robotics kits. Well, no, it's not. It's all that time, it's that space. And then specifically with federal or state grants, all of that in-kind can typically be meant, that in-kind. So budget, the most common pieces: personnel costs, fringe benefits, travel costs, contracts and consultants if you're going to utilize them, equipment, supplies, and then indirect or overhead. So indirect or overhead mostly come more with state or federal grants, but there are some foundations like Bush Foundation that will pay overhead as well. I am ridiculous with budgets. Again, like I talked about being a little bit ridiculous with work plans, it really helps to keep your whole project organized and make sure that you have what you need to do what you say you're going to do. So I'm going to pull up really quickly, if I can, a budget generator or budget template, and it's going to be a little bit tough to see it. But basically, this is a budget that can auto-populate a lot of pieces for you. So I talked about looking at a goal, looking at your objectives, and looking at your activities. So this is my budget by activity. So you can enter in someone's salary, and then go through each activity of your budget and allocate just about how much time you think it will be, and that'll spit out all the total cost, all the FTE, all the fringe for you. And I'm happy to share that as an electronic file with anybody who would want it, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it today. Number one, because you don't necessarily have that much time, and number two, some of you might say, "Oh, good Lord, lady, this is too much," and I totally understand. But really being thoughtful about that budgeting process, being thoughtful about that work plan development can impress your funders where they say, well, they really did think about this. They thought about how we would go about making this project into reality. I do have a simple budget. Many of you, I'm sure, have them as well, but just a simple budget narrative that you can come up and grab after our session is over as well. That's basically a very much oversimplified version of what you just saw. Based on experience, some of the most common oversights that we see, not allowing enough FTE for somebody to actually take on this project, forgetting your overhead, and underestimating travel. So we know that travel per mile got bumped up from 54.5 to 58 cents a mile, and even though that doesn't seem like a lot, it does make an impact on your budget, or it does make a dent within your overall budget. Okay, so I'll pause just a second and let you think through budget and budget narrative. If you have anything that you would like to write down. And I will speedily go through project design, and I promise to have you done by 10:50. All right, so our project design is when we're aligning the when and the where of our project with that how. So we're really pulling things full circle. We often refer to it as finishing our blueprint. So we have our organizational capacity documented, we have our need documented, we have our goals, objectives, and outcomes documented, we have a beautiful budget put together. Now what else is left to do? Well, we need to think about the where. Where are we working? Whether that be in a geographic area or a specific sector, who do we need to pull in as partners? What will their contribution to this project be? Do we need to revise the budget to allow for partner support? And specifically, really in North Dakota, what type of weather-related precautions do we need to take? Right, so when we're developing our timeline or when we're developing our budget, do we need to allow extra overnight stays because we know Old Man Winter wasn't very kind to us this year? And then thinking about the when will this work be done? Does it overlap with any other major events or initiatives, either within your community or within your organization? Does it cross fiscal years? Is there enough time allowed for each goal, objective, and outcome? So really thinking through, how does this project fit within the grand scheme of your entire organization? And then combining the when and where, assigning responsibility, again with the work plan, you can have a really great accountability measurement tool. But this allows grant makers to understand workload, FTE, budget request, creates kind of that built-in staff accountability when we combine the when and the where with the who. So just when you think you're done, before you submit that grant application, think through what some of the challenges might be. So what could go wrong? Do we need to allow for extra wiggle room in our timeline or in our budget? What will we put into place to mitigate those challenges? And is this project able to be sustained? If not, that's okay, but we just have to be upfront with the funder. And if so, and if it can be sustained, how will we sustain it long term? So take just a minute to write down anything that you have with regard to project design or program design. And I'm going to take the last couple of minutes just to talk about a few upcoming grants. So for libraries in Western North Dakota, there are a couple of great opportunities available. The Andrist Fund is having a grant round right now that ends April 30th. And the Rural Community Grant Fund as well has a grant round that ends April 30th. And then there's also Equinor Community Giving within that space. If you're interested in applying for any of those grant pools, just let me know. We work with them directly. The Robert Herman Charitable Trust is a private philanthropic fund out of Wells Fargo, and they invest in children, and they typically have not received a bountiful amount of requests in the past. So there's definitely opportunity within that, that program as well, and that deadline is August 15th. As always, event sponsorship grants from Bush Foundation are a great opportunity to pull in people from around your community, whether they be teens, whether they be seniors, whether they be adults, to think bigger and think differently about your community or even about your library. And the next deadline for that is May 23rd, and you can get up to $50,000 to host a great event like that. I should say, Rural Community Grant Fund, you can get up to $50,000. Andrist Fund, there's no limit. There is a minimum of $5,000. And Equinor, we're probably in that $5,000 to $15,000 range. And then Otto Bremer Trust is a great organization. If your community has a Bremer Bank, consider developing a relationship with your Otto Bremer Trust representative out of the cities, because they're a phenomenal organization that provides operating funding and capital funding. All right, I've got 1 minute left. If anybody has any questions, and I'll hang out afterward as well. Are there any questions?
Is there any disadvantage if you've been rejected or just didn't get it, you know, to reapply again the following year and to continue, or to ask why you weren't accepted?
Sure. So the question is there any disadvantage to continue reapplying even after you've been rejected? I would ask them why, kind of what you were saying. There's a great opportunity to build relationship with funders even after that denial letter has come through, because it might have been something where they just didn't have enough money this year. Or maybe there was something in your grant application that was a trigger to a project that had gone badly in the past. Or maybe they might just be able to say, you know what, this just isn't the best fit for us. So there's always value in calling and asking why, in a nice way. I once had a lady say, well, how could you not fund us? And I said, well, I don't have any money to fund you. I don't know what you want me to say. So in a nice way, just saying, you know, we really want to be better. Can you help us be better? And most people are going to be super receptive to that. But continuing to apply without that kind of feedback, they just kind of start to discount it after a while. Any other questions? Yes.
Not so much a question, but a comment. I'm looking forward to going and using your template. Is there any way we could get an electronic copy of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you the, I can send the little worksheet that I have, and also we have a grant manual that's kind of like a workbook that I can send along as well.
That would be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your Tuesday. It's Tuesday today.